I'm sort of a big believer in everything happens for a reason. Before I did my knee, I was almost not enjoying my football. I was really stressed all the time and it was making me anxious, and I kind of forgot why I wanted to play in the first place. And now, having done my knee and spending 12 months on the sideline, like I was the type that I'd hate to miss one training session. And now I've missed a full year. I really just sort of come back to why I wanted to play, and I'm just enjoying it a lot more, and know that every game's really precious, every training session's really precious, and I especially miss the camaraderie and being out there with my teammates.
Hey, it's Chloe Dalton with KO Sports. We're back with another episode of Everyone's Game. Today we're talking about an issue that's incredibly prevalent in women's sport and has started to impact a huge number of female athletes, and that is ACL ruptures. We saw a number of people start talking about this issue off the back of the FIFA Women's World Cup, where a number of players were ruled out of the competition following ACL ruptures. And today I'm joined by Sydney Swans AFLW player Maddy Collier, who unfortunately was one of the athletes impacted by an ACL rupture, coming off the back of your rehab, Maddy. Talk to us about that moment when you injured your knee.
Like, it's one of those things that stays with you, I think. I can remember the sound that it made. It was just like in between like a pop and a crack sort of feeling. And I think when I did it, so I'd sort of lunged to go for a tackle. When I did it, I knew immediately that I'd done something. I wasn't exactly sure what it was at the time. They always say, oh, I'm not sure, we'll have to wait for a scan. And I think that's when you know, like, it's something bad. So in terms of the pain, it was like an instant pain and really quite sharp. And then after that, it sort of dies off. So I can see how people get up and continue playing or whatever else, because the physio was like, can you walk? And I was like, yeah, I can. So I kind of got up and walked off to the sideline, but was very unstable. So any slight movement didn't feel good at all. I think in crisis moments, I tend to get quite practical and pragmatic. So I was just like, when's the scan? You know, where do I have to be? What time? You know, I just wanted something to focus on so that I wasn't thinking about the most likely outcome, which is doing my ACL.
Yeah, it's a pretty horrible thing to go through, and I have had a number of injuries myself. I haven't done my ACL. I've got some wooden armrests over here, but that feeling, I know that feeling so well of waiting for a scan result, and it's just this horrible thing where there's almost part of you where you feel like you've done something bad and you feel like you're waiting for a confirmation, but you're just hoping with everything that it's not what you think it might be.
Yeah, I remember there's a really specific test, like a tug test, so they try and feel for the end of the ACL, I guess, ligament. And because I was at the club, pretty much every physio there was having a go at the tug test, and I was convincing myself, I was like, I can feel it. Like, there's definitely an end point there. Like, you know, you just have that small little percentage of hope that it's not going to be the worst outcome. But I could tell from their faces that they weren't as confident. I suppose when I got the news, I actually had a bit of a delayed response. Like, I think I was like, okay, so what does that mean? Surgery. And then it was only sort of when I got home and called my mum that, you know, the tears started and everything. And
sport is really cruel in that sense, where as an athlete, sometimes you work as hard as you possibly can, but you don't actually get to control what happens to you. How did you process that part of the injury?
I'm sort of a big believer in everything happens for a reason. So before I did my knee, I was almost not enjoying my football. I was really stressed all the time and it was making me anxious, and I kind of forgot why I wanted to play in the first place. And now, having done my knee and spending 12 months on the sideline, like I was the type that I'd hate to miss one training session. And now I've missed a full year. I really just sort of come back to why I wanted to play, and I'm just enjoying it a lot more, and know that every game's really precious, every training session's really precious, and I especially miss the camaraderie and being out there with my teammates.
The injury prevention component is a big part of it. So in the lead up to doing your ACL injury, I know we probably do quite a similar program as AFLW players, where you go through your warm up and your prep, and there's a number of like jump and land type mechanics that we do. While you're doing all of those, were you aware of the purpose of those exercises?
I think when you're at probably our level, you do get a lot of education around why they're important. my cousin who coaches just like a local league in WA, he actually messaged me one day and he's like, is there anything that we can do, I can teach these girls, because I've had 3 people in my team go down in a pre-season to ACL. So, and just basically made a point to say that it's a lot about technique. So especially tackling or any movement where you're stepping to the side, they say that you need to keep your trunk, which is like your core, in line and over your knee. It's when your knee is outside of it, that's when you run the risk. A lot of plyometrics and jump land and learning how to land safely and correctly is really big. So that's probably the gap that I've noticed a lot between, as I said earlier, the professional league and the lower leagues. So that's the advice that I gave him. And just to make sure that's a priority, don't just dismiss it as, give them an allotted time. Even if they have to get there earlier, it's worth the 10 to 15 minutes that they do to save some injuries. When
you went to see the surgeon, how did the surgeon make a decision about what procedure you were going to have and what graft you were going to use?
Yeah, so it was a pretty open conversation. I guess he presented, I think there was 3 or 4 options. I think the usual ones are patella tendon, which is your knee, hamstring graft, and there's actually 2 more. So there's like a plastic one, or you can get it from a cadaver. I sort of just went with the hamstring graft, which is, it had a lot of research behind it, and a lot of people had done it, but also I've always had pretty strong hammies, so I kind of backed that I'd be able to rehab those quite well. And then there was also a conversation around, I got something called a lateral loop. I'm not sure what the technical term is, but it's basically your ACL stops your knee going too far forward and back, but it also stops the side-to-side movement. And he said that there was sort of 3 main risk factors around getting the lateral loop, or why you should. And I remember 2 of them being, one was an athlete and the other one was a female. So just being a woman meant that you were more at risk to doing your ACL. And so they recommended that because it helps stop re-rupture by about 30%. Initially, I thought it would just all be about the knee and making sure that the knee was good, but a lot of it is actually the hamstring or other things that have come from it. So, which is something was new to me when I did my knee. I thought it was just, you just got to learn how to use your knee again. But it's like, no, you actually have to get your hamstring strong and your calf strong and make sure that all of those sort of systems are working around your knee. Your knee's good now, don't worry about the knee. That was an interesting learning curve.
What did the first 3 months of your rehab look like post-surgery?
Yeah, so the first 3 months, I guess initially after surgery, you're just trying to recover. You're trying to, I suppose, keep swelling down. I especially swelled a lot in my knee, which is really hard, I suppose, to get movement back in when it's so swollen. And it's funny, the milestones that you reach, like I've never concentrated so hard on trying to straighten my leg or trying to find my quad muscle, my VMO they call it. So that was actually quite a challenge, because you go from gameplay and like, how are we going to score here? What's the ball movement? Like all these really challenging, I guess, mental games to, you need to straighten your leg. And you're like, it just feels like a massive plummet from where you were to where you are now. And I found it difficult because lots of people talked about like, you got to celebrate the little wins. And I was like, that really just doesn't feel like a little win to me. Like I used to do that all day, every day. And now it's like a really big challenge. So I guess those initial stages were tough because I also hated sitting still. I hated the idea of feeling like I'd gone so far backwards and not being able to do the things I normally did. And so I think the first 3 months was definitely the hardest, because that's when you're purely in the gym. You're not outside with your friends. It's just about building strength back. And it was full on. From the minute you get there to the minute you leave, you don't stop. It's like the prep beforehand, then the warm up, then the actual gym, then you've got balance. Meanwhile, all the girls are out there training. They come back in, they have a snack, then they roll into their gym. It's just, mentally it was quite overwhelming because it is a very extensive rehab, especially in the first 3.
And looking at the 4 to 9 month period of time? That's when you start to get back out on the track a little bit, get
Yeah.
back to running and things like that. How did that feel?
Yeah, so for 4 to 9 months, probably at the end of 3 months, but from 4, definitely, you progress to running outside. And even though it's 60 meters in a straight line, it's the most freeing feeling. Like, you've gone from just being so restricted on what you can do to finally being outside. And, you know, you can see the team training in the background, and it just gives you another like push to keep going, because you've still got another, I suppose, 8 months ahead of you. And then I guess from there, you're just building up. So it's about change of direction, the big one, and agility, because you're essentially learning how to do that again with a new knee. So they talk a lot about like having a new knee after you've done your ACL, because it's never the same. And rehab is a lot of mental, both the challenge of it, but also trying to convince your brain that your knee is good to use again. So 4 to 9 is just basically about building up and trying to get to the point where you can be reintroduced to training. So it's a very exciting time. It really makes up for the first 3 months of crap that you have to deal with.
And 10 to 12 is getting ready to play again. So it's that real end stage rehab, trying to factor in a lot of different components of the game to be ready to go and play again. How was that part of it?
Yeah, it's awesome. So 10 to 12 is, for me, there's no great stages to rehab, but they're the rewarding parts, because it's reintroducing contact. So we play a contact sport, so it's a massive part of it, and I think it's a really important part to focus on. At that stage, you're back into drills with the team, which is such a good part. Like, for when you play a team sport, like, that's what you want to be around, and you get so much energy off your teammates and the people around you. So when you're back into that environment, it's just another boost again, and you're kind of getting a sniff of like, oh, I'm going to play again soon. Like, it's on the cusp and you're there. So the interesting part about coming back from rehab, I found, is your milestones that people are ticking off are all physical. So it's, she can change direction now. She's done lots of contact. I'm confident that she can go up for this ball. And so from a physical perspective, you've ticked all the boxes and therefore you're ready to play. But I found the gap for me was, okay, physically I'm ready to play, but there's this whole mental side that I have considered, but it's not really been, I suppose, cared for from a football team perspective. So I think that's quite important to consider as well for others that are coming back from the ACL, whether they do externally through a psychologist. But I think that's super important, because, as you would probably know, like, physical is only so much of the game. A lot of it is in between your ears. And so it's really important to consider just a game plan or how you're going to approach that, because it is a trauma, I guess, at the end of the day, and you need to sort of have some sort of, tools in your back pocket on how you're going to approach moments that you feel might make you vulnerable.
What did that process look like for you to be mentally as well as physically ready to play again?
Well, I probably sought it myself a bit. I did see a psychologist, and she's great, and we just talked through, I guess, it's a lot about being present in the moment. I think I was telling you earlier, like, I struggled to watch any collisions happening, whether it was footy on the TV or live. That for me was really triggering, and I sort of couldn't deal with it, and I couldn't bear to face the thought that if I'd done it again, or being put in those situations. So we did a lot of work around, I guess, visualization on game day. And so from the waking up in the morning to especially getting to the ground, and, how was I going to, like, what sort of did I want to feel like when I was there? And then when the game's on, it was all just about having a couple of focuses to think about that I could always come back to, and really dropping into my body. So we talked about being ready to play. I think post ACL, I would, I suppose, freeze a bit. Not freeze, but like, I'd get stuck still. I'd stand rather than be active. So we talked a lot about getting into athletic position. having hands ready to go. And then that kind of just brought me back to the moment where I was, and I didn't have time to think about what could happen. It was all just about what's unfolding in front of me. And I think that really helped in my first game back, just being able to have that routine that brought me back to where I was and the focuses that I wanted to think about. Because by the time you run through all that, the ball's moved and you got to get going anyway. So it's really good to just snap you back into the moment.
And you recently played your first practice match. Big congratulations. It's a big milestone to get back. How did it feel being back out there?
Yeah, it was great. I think I kept my nerves pretty well under wraps, I think. I kind of gave the girls a heads up that I was like, look, I want to fly under the radar here. Like, I don't want the hype. And they were really good about it to just keep it as things normally would be. But yeah, there was one moment just before the siren went and I was like, oh, here we go, like it's on. But then, yeah, I think you just sort of can snap back into, right, we've done this. And I'd done full training and a lot of match sim as well, which helped a lot mentally, just like that rehearsal. I think the very first contest, I was a little bit hesitant. And then I kind of just said to myself, like, no, that's not you. Like, let's go. We're back on here. And yeah, it was awesome. I only played the first half and it was a really wet weather day. But I couldn't wipe the smile off my face. It was just, it's what you want. Like, it made the whole 12 months worth it. So it was awesome.
I think if I had to give someone advice about going through a long-term injury, for me, it was always about actually feeling the emotion of it first. I had a couple of injuries where I'd almost just try and push through, celebrate the little wins and just move on. And then I felt afterwards that I hadn't actually processed it. So I think that's the advice I often give to people is you actually have to feel it. It's okay to be upset and angry because sport can be really, really cruel. But from there, it's only in hindsight you do get to appreciate what an injury can teach you. So you kind of just have to go through the hard stuff and it's at the back end that you get to appreciate the good things. Do you have any advice for people?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so true. Like when you do a big injury, you think it's the worst thing in the world, but there's actually a lot that it can teach you. As I said earlier, I think things happen for a reason. So what I've learned off the back of such a long rehab is, first of all, I've learned a love of the game again, but also there was a lot of good things to come out of rehab. So my advice would be, I suppose, it's not all negative, and I think take the learnings from it and take the growth from it because, yeah, as you said, like you need to go through hard times sometimes in your life to really reap the rewards at the end. And ACL's certainly done that for me, and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone, but if you are one of those people that has to go through it, you'll learn a lot about yourself. And I've definitely grown as a person from that. And yeah, like you don't want to ever have the injury, but I've had it now, and I think it's a really valuable tool to have.
Thank you so much for sharing today, Maddy, and for your vulnerability and honesty and talking about such an incredibly important topic for a number of athletes, but female athletes in particular. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chloe. Thanks for having me.
And thank you so much for watching. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comments or let us know if there are any topics you'd be keen for us to chat about. We'll see you next time on Everyone's Game.